Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Another wonderful day in our Master's presence together. We thank Him that we can be here together and continue to delight ourselves in His word that gives us all that we need to keep praising Him. And we are learning valuable lessons as we journey through the wilderness in the book of Bemiṭbar and learn how we are to draw near to our Master and how we are not to draw near to Him. So today we are looking at Bemiṭbar, Numbers 16 to 18, in a Torah portion called Qoraḥ. And so with that, let's get going. Kayla, hold on. You need to get the word. It's at the blank screen. Okay, so let me get that going so long. There was a couple of technical issues now getting the worship sorted, so I know everyone's patient. They don't have a choice. Okay, see, there we go. Thank you. Okay, Kayla.
And Qoraḥ, son of Yitshar, son of Keath, son of Levi, took both Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliav, and On, son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, and they rose up before Moshe with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, old ones of the meeting, men of name. And they assembled against Moshe and against Aaron, and said to them, Enough of you, for all the congregation is set apart, all of them, and Yahweh is in their midst. Why then do you lift up yourselves above the assembly of Yahweh? And when Moshe heard, he fell on his face, and spoke to Qoraḥ and all his company, saying, Tomorrow morning Yahweh shall make known who is his and who is set apart, and bring him near to him. And let him bring near to him the one whom he chooses. Do this, take fire holders, Qoraḥ and all your company, and put fire in them, and put incense in them before Yahweh tomorrow. And it shall be that the one whom Yahweh chooses is the set apart one. Enough of you, sons of Levi. And Moshe said to Qoraḥ, Hear now, you sons of Levi. Is it little to you that the Elohim of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to perform the service of the dwelling place of Yahweh, and to stand before the congregation to serve them, and that he has brought you near to himself, you and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you? Yet you seek the priesthood as well? Therefore you and all your company are set against Yahweh. And Aaron, what is he that you grumble against him? And Moshe sent to all Dathan and Abiram the sons of Eliav, but they said, We are not coming up. Is it little that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, that you would also seize total rule over us? Also, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you bore out the eyes of these men? We are not coming up. And Moshe became very displeased, and said to Yahweh, Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I done harm to any of them. Then Moshe said to Qoraḥ, Tomorrow you and all your company shall be there before Yahweh, you and they and Aaron. And take each one his fire holder, and you shall put incense in it. And let each one bring his fire holder before Yahweh, 250 fire holders, and you and Aaron, each one with his fire holder. So each one took his fire holder and put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tent of appointment with Moshe and Aaron. And Qoraḥ assembled all the congregation against them at the door of the tent of appointment. Then the esteem of Yahweh appeared to all the congregation, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from the midst of this congregation, and let me consume them in a moment. But they fell on their faces and said, O El, Elohim of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, are you wroth with all the congregation? And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the congregation, saying, Move away from around the tents of Qoraḥ, Dathan, and Abiram. So Moshe rose up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, Please turn away from the tents of these wrong men. Do not touch whatever belongs to them, lest you be consumed in all their sins. Then they moved away from around the tents of Qoraḥ, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of the tents, with their wives and their sons and their little children. And Moshe said, By this you know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works, that they are not from my own heart. If these die as all men do, or if they are visited as all men are visited, then Yahweh has not sent me. But if Yahweh creates what is unheard of, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up, with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have scorned Yahweh. And it came to be, as he ended speaking all these words, that the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, with their households and all the men with Qoraḥ, with all their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And all Israel who were round about them fled at their cry, for they said, Lest the earth swallow us up. And the fire came out from Yahweh, and consumed 250 men who were offering incense. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Say to Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, to pick up the fireholders out of the blaze, for they are set apart, and scatter the fire some distance away. The fireholders of these men who sinned against their own lives, let them be made into beaten plates as a covering for the slaughter place, because they brought them before Yahweh, therefore they are set apart. And let them become a sign to the children of Israel. And Eleazar the priest took the bronze fireholders, with which those who were burnt up had brought, and they were beaten out as a covering on the slaughter place, a remembrance to the children of Israel, that no stranger who is not of the seed of Aaron should come near to offer incense before Yahweh, and not be like Qoraḥ and his company, as Yahweh had said to him through Moshe. But all the congregation of the children of Israel grumbled against Moshe and against Aaron on the next day, saying, You have killed the people of Yahweh. And it came to be, when the congregation assembled against Moshe and against Aaron, that they turned toward the tent of appointment. And see, the cloud covered it, and the esteem of Yahweh appeared. And Moshe and Aaron came before the tent of appointment. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Arise from amidst this congregation, and let me consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces. So Moshe said to Aaron, Take the fire holder and put fire in it from the slaughter place, and lay incense on. And go, hurry to the congregation and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from Yahweh, the plague has begun. And Aaron took it as Moshe commanded, and ran into the midst of the assembly, and saw that the plague had begun among the people. And he laid on the incense, and made atonement for the people, and stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. And those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died on account of Qoraḥ. Then Aaron returned to Moshe at the door of the tent of appointment, for the plague had stopped.
Okay, so the Torah portion, as I said, called Qoraḥ, which means bold. And this is a very, very important Torah portion. They're all important, but when we also consider that the warning that Yehuda gives in his letter, the one just before Chazon, and likening the rebellion of many in the assemblies of the master are likened to that of Qoraḥ, along with the Bilam and all the wrong ways, and even Cain, who put his brother to death. So, when we look at this Torah portion, Qoraḥ, we can learn some powerful lessons and are reminded of our need to guard our position in the master and not be out of line in any way, so that we are not at risk of being destroyed, but that we are perfectly walking in obedience to the master, so we can bear the fruit of righteousness and have somewhat to share and show from our lives in obedience to him. So this is such a critical lesson that we are reading today, or many lessons that we're reading today in this Torah portion, that we have to take serious and heed of, lest we find ourselves being caught in that similar rebellion against Yahweh and against those that Yahweh has appointed to lead his body according to his perfect design. We're also able to see, as I said, in the renewed writings in the letter to Yehuda, it's in verse 11, it's only one chapter. So it says, Woe to them, because they have gone in the way of Cain, gave themselves to the delusion of Bilam for a reward, and perished in the rebellion of Qoraḥ. Now this is the wicked ones that were in the assembly. Remember, this isn't speaking of those that are outside, that don't know Yahweh. Yehuda is warning us against those who are in the assembly, in the body, performing the feasts, joining in, reveling in the feast, but yet are, in Yahweh's eyes, very clearly like those who are identified as being like Qoraḥ. And so we learn some powerful lessons. Now, as I said, Qoraḥ means bold, and it comes from the verb karach, which actually means to make bold or make yourself bold or shave your head. So what we learn from this Torah portion, now, there are many people that go bald naturally. So this isn't against baldness as a whole, but what we learn from the lessons of the rebellion of Qoraḥ is the self-imposed making oneself bald, taking upon yourself to take the hair off your head on a literal level, and learning what that is as a wonderful lesson on a spiritual level and how we are to walk in the Master. Now, this is a powerful lesson that we are getting once again as we're going through all these Torah portions in the book of Bemiṭbar on rebellion. And this reference of a picture of baldness that we're able to see is one that shows a stripping of submission to authority. That's what it really comes down to. And that's what we learn from the life of Qoraḥ and his company that joined with him. So when we recognize that our head speaks of our covering, and then we understand that Messiah is our head, and that's why we also see when Shaul makes it very clear in the renewed writings that men should not cover their head when praying or prophesying, and women should cover their head when praying or prophesying. But we also understand that this is the covering of the head of a woman when she's praying or prophesying is not her hair, as per se. She puts a covering over that. But having said that, we also take note in Scripture, when are we instructed not to shave our heads, literally, and when are we? There are key factors that we can't add or take away, but we must look what Scripture gives. And we recognize and realize that the head speaks of a covering. And the shaving of one's head is actually at large forbidden in Israel, except for specific instances. And I'll just run through 5 of those as a very clear pattern and instruction of when one would be required to shave the head according to the Torah. The first is in Vayikra 13, verse 33, when it says, he shall shave himself, but the eruption he does not shave, and the priest shall shut up the one with the eruption 7 days. This is one who has an infection in the beard or the head, and as part of the inspection or the cleansing process, this is what would be required to obviously shave himself, but he doesn't shave where the eruption is because you can hurt it. I mean, it's a practical thing. So it's a way of actually beginning to highlight and expose possible deeper issues, etc. Then in Vayikra 14, verse 8 to 9, it's clear in the instruction of the cleansing of a leper, where we see he who is to be cleansed shall wash his garments and shall shave off all his hair and wash himself in water and shall be clean. Then after that he comes into the camp, but shall stay outside the camp 7 days. Sorry, not 10 days. And on the 7th day it shall be that he shaves all the hair off his head and his beard and his eyebrows, even all his hair he shaves off. And he shall wash his garments and wash his body in water and shall be clean. The third instance we see is in regards to a Nazirite vow, but when one takes a Nazirite vow, a vow of separation, and that Nazirite vow is broken for whatever reason, maybe came into contact with a dead body or became defiled for some reason during his vow of separation, then we are told in Bemiṭbar 6, verse 9, when anyone dies beside him in an instant, suddenly, and he has defiled the head of his separation, then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing, and on the 7th day he shaves it. And then in regards to the completion of a Nazirite vow, in verse 18, it says, the Nazirite shall shave the head of his separation at the door of the tent of meeting, and shall take the hair from the head of his separation, and shall put it on the fire which is under the slaughtering of the peace offerings. Now, in regards to the cleansing process required for the Levites, was that they'd also have to shave their whole body in Bemiṭbar 8, verse 6 to 7. These should all be fresh in our mind because we've been through them over the last couple of weeks. When we are told, take the Levites from among the children of Israel, and you shall cleanse them, and do this to them to cleanse them, sprinkle water of sin offering on them, and they shall shave all their body, and shall wash their garments and cleanse themselves. So here we've been given clear instances under the Levitical priesthood in the service of the tabernacle when it was permitted to actually have a shaving done of the hair of one's head or the whole body. And there's clear instructions given to us in the Torah when not to shave one's head. And in regards to the requirements of a leader, we are clearly told in Vayikra 21, verse 4 to 5, it says, a leader does not defile himself among his people to profane himself. They do not make any bald place on their heads, and they do not shave the corner of their beard, and they do not make a cutting in their flesh. And in regards to the shaving of one's head, to mourn for the dead, it was not permitted for the children of Israel. In Devarim 14 verse 1, it says, "You are the children of Yahweh your Elohim. Do not cut yourselves, nor shave the front of your head for the dead, for you are a set-apart people to Yahweh your Elohim, and Yahweh has chosen you to be a people for himself, a treasured possession above all peoples who are on the face of the earth." These were mourning rites that many of the nations would do in mourning the loss of one of their own. And Yahweh says, you don't do what the nations do. And a lot of times we see with the leader and profaning himself, making bald patches on their heads, or even rounding their beards, destroying the corner of their beard. A lot of times people say, no, that was in regards to mourning for the dead, etc. No, we must understand the leader needs to set the example. And there are many claiming leaders today who are likened to Qoraḥ in many ways, who are assuming positions of authority, yet are not actually that which Yahweh is designated. And by their fruits we will know them. So when they're shaving their upper lip, so to speak, or when they're rounding and making goatees, that should be a Qoraḥ sign of rebellion against the authority of Yahweh. Now, I'm not going to get into detail about beards, because you can read my article, Why Men Should Have Beards. And when I say a beard, it's a full beard and nothing but a beard. Okay. And so we understand that there are many claiming teachers in the Torah today, leaders in the Torah today, that can be equated to those that Yaakov is warning us about when likened to the rebellion of Qoraḥ. Because Qoraḥ was a leader amongst the people, but one that proved his leadership to be lacking in the correct set apartness according to Yahweh's standards, as pictured metaphorically through his name specifically being rendered bald. It's the self-imposing. This ability to think, I'll do what I want, self-imposed shaving, yes. So these are the do's and don'ts, if you will, with regards to the Torah giving us clear instructions around the idea of shaving one's head. Many people today, as I said, argue that, they don't shave their head for the dead, they're just shaving their head, and it's a preference, be it for fashion or maybe even in support of a cause. We have a lot of emotionally driven causes today that call people to shave their heads to raise money for that which is clearly a curse from Yahweh. And so we must be on guard against following the crowds to actually do evil. And when I say do evil, you're not doing the functional obedience of the word, but doing what man has done on an emotional basis, pulling at the flesh and causing people to think that they're actually doing right. And so the only time that a child of Elohim was to shave their head has been made clear to us in the scriptures that I've mentioned. Now, there are also times when a person may need to have been shaved in an emergency, say for medical conditions. I mean, that is obvious, to assist when somebody's got a cut or something. I mean, that's obvious, okay? So we're not going to get into debate of that. But we also see that the shaving of anyone's head, including the beard, is also seen in Scripture as a symbol of shame. We're given this example in the men that David had sent, messengers that David had sent to comfort Hanun, son of Nachash, the children of Ammon, when his father had died. And so David had good relations with his father, so he sent messengers to send words of comfort. And we're told in 1 Chronicles 19, verse 4-5, what Hanun did to David's servants. He says, he took David's servants and shaved them and cut off their garments in the middle at their buttocks and sent them away. And when some went and informed David about the men, he sent to meet them because the men were greatly ashamed. And the sovereign said, remain at Jericho until your beards have grown, then return. I mean, there's an exact thing. Wait till your beards have grown back, then return, so that you won't return in shame. Now, in Israel's rebellious state, as we go through all of the prophets and Yahweh's warning against turning away, doing what the nations do, sending his prophets to come and call them back because they'd been rebellious, they'd obviously resorted to what the nations were doing. Everything that the nations did, they wanted to do because they felt, well, our life is a bit boring when we just obey. and they started doing what looked nice in the flesh, what the nations were doing, and they began making themselves bald. And in Yirmiyahu, Yahweh is speaking of how this rebellious nation would not continue to do such practices in the process of him cleaning up and throwing out this rebellious and corrupt people from the land, whose wrath they would face. And they wouldn't actually, when Yahweh's wrath is poured out on this rebellious people, they wouldn't be able to continue in the corrupt practices. Yirmiyahu 16 verse 6 says, both great and small shall die in the land. They shall not be buried, and no one shall lament for them or cut themselves or make themselves bald for them. In other words, Yahweh's saying, I'm not going to let them do what they've been doing in error like the nations are doing. They won't do it anymore. There's another instance when a shaving of the head is permitted by a woman, and that is in Devarim 21. And that is when Israel would go out and they would fight against their enemies, not those that they were supposed to destroy in Canaan, yeah? Canaan, yeah, there we go. But the nations are far off. If they then saw a woman they liked, there was a process and a procedure, and she would shave her head, trim her nails, put aside the mantle of her captivity. It's a sign of showing that she's stripping herself away from the authority which she was once under. And after a month of days, that's when then it would be permitted to take her as a wife, if, it was one that had now submitted correctly. So we see these are clear instructions were given in the Torah in regards to how we maintain our body before the face of the Master, because it has a clear reflection of whether we are being obedient in submission to his ways or whether we're simply being rebellious because we'll do what we want. Now, we see a powerful picture of our Master redeeming our lives and how we've been stripped of all false authority and we've submitted under his headship, and therefore we recognize that staying in him, we must guard ourselves from stripping away that authority. And the implication of shaving one's head is one of those symbols that reflect one's inability to submit properly to the ways of the Torah. And it's a big problem in today's media-driven generation. I don't even know how to say it, because I get this feeling as we go through this Torah portion, one of the things that we've got to be on guard against is the rebellion of pride and assuming that I don't need anybody to instruct me, to teach me, to lead me, to guide me. I don't need anybody to submit under. I can do it myself. And with the available platforms that are, or all the platforms that are available for us today, it's almost like everybody's a teacher. Everybody, well, maybe today's better word is influencer, because it's like, I'll also do, instead of people staying in their lane, so to speak, we all got a race to run. And we need to be staying in our lane. It's almost like people that aren't called to be teachers are presenting themselves as teaching the word on media platforms. And it's all like, I'll show you this, I'll show you this. And they're being led by every wind of doctrine. So they're not following those that Yahweh's appointed to follow. We've often said, go where Yahweh's called you to be a part of and stick with that. Don't go there and then steal from other places, so to speak, and then come and challenge the authority where you are called to be under. Because that's typically what we see happening today, is people are actually stealing from all over, every source, having no ability to discern between clean and unclean, profane and set apart, nor able to make a distinction of what is truly appointed of Yahweh and is in line with the word and not. And so they get into the state of, well, I'll just go and pick. And this is where Shaul warns about they'll heap up for themselves those tickling the ears. So there's this almost like this frenzy of going out and just picking what looks nice, bring it in, and then thinking you have the authority to present. And half the time people are presenting something that's mixed messages because it's not in a clear line of Yahweh's set apart truth. And then the lack of submission to where Yahweh has called a person to be, And this is what we're able to learn as a lesson for our lives today when we look at Qoraḥ's rebellion, because it's a living word. You know, physical things may have changed. They didn't have internet back in Qoraḥ's day. And I'm not saying the internet is bad. But what I am saying is there's a form of rebellion likened to Qoraḥ that is being lived out and deemed acceptable by the masses today who claim to be believers. And this is what we need to be warned about so that we find ourselves not at risk of being destroyed by the fiery wrath of our master. Now, when we look at the names that are given in regards to Qoraḥ, we know, as I said, Qoraḥ is a reflection of making oneself bald, stripping away the authority that one should be submitted under. He was the son of Yitzhar, which means shining oil, and he was the son of Kehath, which means assembly, who was the son of Levi. So we can see that Qoraḥ was very close in genealogy to Moshe and Aharon. Okay, and so Qoraḥ came from a good line, so to speak. Yet the lesson that we learn from his life is that he himself made himself bald, so to speak, as a direct act of rebellion as a result of him actually not being content with his position. That's what it really came down to. It may be possible that he was not content in his position with the fact that he wasn't actually the leader of the Kehathites. And he might have felt that I'm supposed to be the leader of the Kehathites. It was possible that, he was upset the fact that Elitzaphan, who was the son of Hebron, was actually the leader of the Kehathites, and Qoraḥ felt I should be and not him. He would have felt that in birthing order, he was before Elitzaphan, so why is Elitzaphan the one who's leading the Kehathites? In Shemot 6 verse 18, just to give you a bit of clarity around the genealogy around this, we see the sons of Kehath being listed as follows: Amram, Yitzhar, and Hebron, and Uziel. And the years of the life of Kehath were 133. So Hebron was the father of Elitzaphan, who was the fourth son of Kehath, while Yitzhar, the father of Qoraḥ, was the second, because Amram was the first, and from Amram came Moshe and Aharon. So just to give you a bit of order of birth, Kehath might have felt that he'd been wrongly, Qoraḥ, might have felt that he had been, not properly positioned, and he had some kind of right to be claiming position. In Vayikra 10 verse 4, we see when Moshe called to Mishael and to Elitzaphan, so sons of Hebron. So here it's not Elitzaphan, it's the same person, it's just written as Elitzaphan. Hebron, the uncle of Aharon, and said to him, "Come near, take your brothers from before the set-apart place out the camp." Now, what was this? This is when Moshe called Elitzaphan and Mishael to come and remove who? Nadav and Avihu, who were struck dead by Yahweh because they brought strange fire. And so what we see here is that Moshe saw the sons of Hebron as better serving priests than Kehath was. So he called them to come and remove as obedient act, ones who would do the job correctly. Now, what we see here, the pictures that are given to us, Qoraḥ, I keep saying Kehath, sorry, Qoraḥ, I'm going to confuse the people, sorry about that. Qoraḥ had the assumption that he deserved to be a leader, or a higher position of leadership, rather, and he was grieved at the seeming loss of his perceived rights to actually be a bit more in charge than what he was. And so a lot of people today are doing the same thing. When they feel that they are owed something and when they don't get their perceived way, they actually get upset about it. They got a huge chip on their shoulders, and when they have this chip on their shoulder, so to speak, they reject and rebel against all authority. Now, when we look at the sons of Kehath, what were their instructions? Now, you got Kehath, Gershon, Merari, the three sons of Aharon. Yes, thank you. And their duty in regards to the priesthood, with Kehath, they were not permitted to have wagons or cattle because they had to bear all the elements that they had to carry on their shoulders. So that's why I like this picture, because Kehath is one that should have been bearing one another's burdens of the brothers and being part of the service, instead of carrying the proper weight or burden of responsibility on his shoulder, he had a chip on his shoulder. And so he would shrug his shoulders at his duty of being sons of Levi, not Aharon. Yes, thank you. Sons of Levi. I was getting a bit confused there. I'm just trying to bring you in what we've been through over the last couple of weeks and responsibilities that we're given. Now, coming from Kehath, you should actually have shoulders that are not shrugging at obedience or having a chip on the shoulder, but one that's actually carrying the presence of the master correctly. Yeshua tells us that in Matthew 23 that neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, the Messiah, but the greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Kehath wanted to be exalted by his own accolades and assumed position and right. He wanted a title, but he didn't want the responsibility. Qoraḥ. I keep saying Kehath. Thank you, Carlene. Qoraḥ. He wanted the title, he wanted the position, but he didn't want the responsibility that comes with a position of leadership. I've already quoted from the letter of Yehuda, and it's very clear warning that's given to us, as it was back then, that a warning against the wicked who had perverted the favor of Elohim, denied the only Master Yeshua Messiah, and they are classed as being likened to those who perished in the rebellion of Qoraḥ. Now, the Greek word that's used in the book of Yehuda for rebellion is antilogia, and it means rebellion, it means gainsaying, Old English word, contradiction, or to cause a dispute or make a dispute or show hostility. And it comes from the word anti-lego, okay, so it's not against Lego making, but anti-lego, which means to speak against or to contradict or to oppose or decline to obey, refuse to have anything to do with another. So you get the picture. Now, anti-lego comes from anti, which is a preposition which means over, against, or opposed to, and lego, which means to say, address, or to speak, or command, or advise. In other words, it's against that which has been spoken or commanded. That's what the rebellion is all about. Now, the root word anti-lego is actually translated as back-talking in Shaul's letter to the believers in Rome in chapter 10, verse 21, where he says, and to Israel, he says, all day long I have stretched out my hands to a disobedient and back-talking people. So rebellious people always want the last say, because they're always talking back. So something's been said, and they talk back in against that which has been spoken. So you get the idea of rebellion. Okay. Now, the Greek word that's translated as disobedient is apitheo, which means disbelieved or to disobey. And Shaul was quoting from Yeshayahu chapter 65, verse 2, when Yahweh said, I have held out my hands all day long to a stubborn people who walk in a way that is not good after their own thoughts. Shaul was quoting this when referring to the clear fact that while the word of Elohim had gone out into all the earth, there were still so many people that were refusing to submit and obey to the clear call of returning to Yahweh and putting their complete trust in him. In chapter 11 of Romans, Shaul goes on and he quotes the words of Eliyahu and says that the rebellious had killed Yahweh's prophets and overthrown Yahweh's slaughter places. Now, when Yahweh felt all alone, remember when he ran away? When Eliyahu felt all alone and he ran away from Isabel's threats, and Yahweh appeared to him, and Eliyahu said to Yahweh, I'm all alone, I'm the only one left. And Yahweh said, no, I've kept 7,000 who have not bowed their knees to Baal. We see here the encouragement that we're given in our day is that Yahweh reminds us that there is a true remnant of faithful servants of the Most High, even amidst a wicked and rebellious, back-talking generation. It's no different today because the majority of mankind is outwardly rebellious against the Master. They're disobedient. They become vicious back-talkers. Now, typically what makes it alive for us is that the warning against the backtalkers that we see in Scripture, both in the prophets and the renewed writings, is to those who claim to be part of a believing people. It's not of the nations, because the nations don't really worry about the commands we are doing our best to guard. But it's those who claim to be in a covenant relationship that want to speak as a backtalker against the need to obey. And that's the lessons we're able to learn on the warnings given against any form of rebellion. Now, in Yeshayahu 65 that I quoted, where I've sent, I've revealed my hand, or what did he say exactly? He says, I've held out my hands to a backtalking, rebellious, stubborn people. Now, the Aramaic translation of Yeshayahu actually renders I have held out my hand, or stretched out my hand, is I have sent my prophets. Now, we understand that picture, because every prophet that Yahweh had sent was a method of him where his arm is not too short to save, but by his word, he's sending his messengers to call them back to him as a body that stays in obedience. The prophets were called to call a backsliding and rebellious, back-talking people back to Elohim to properly submit. And we learn from this how Elohim continually made his hand readily available to people who disobey and speak against his commands. This is actually a picture of his compassion that he has and his loving commitment to his covenants that he made with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Both of the Greek words apitheo and antilego are used in the Septuagint of Yeshayahu 65 verse 2 in describing the very stubborn and rebellious people. And the Hebrew word for stubborn is sarar. It means rebellious, backsliding, or stubborn. And we see a powerful witness here against backsliding. Backsliding can be very subtle. It starts with one little, I don't like what's been said. I don't kind of agree. You might be immature because you don't have the understanding yet, and you don't like what's being told to you, and that then causes you to go find something that you like to hear in contradiction to that, just as Qoraḥ did when he got Dathan, Aviram, and On to join him in his rebellion. So too will people heap up for themselves those tickling the ear to satisfy their stance against what they're supposed to be hearing but they don't agree with. Qoraḥ's rebellion is something that we see happening generation after generation. So many people stubbornly rebelling against the authority of the word of Elohim and his appointed leaders. Now, when I say that, it's because most of the people rejected the prophets. Our master said, just as they persecuted the prophets who were before you, so they will persecute you for righteousness' sake. Qoraḥ had to get other people on his side to fuel his rebellion and make it almost sound like justifiable. And so he took Dathan and Aviram and On. And so Dathan means belonging to a fountain. Aviram means exalted father, or the exalted one is my father. And Eliav means El is my father. On, they were sons of Eliav. Now On means wealth or vigor. He was the son of Peleth, which means swiftness to flee. Now Qoraḥ went and took all these men, Dathan, Aviram, and On, and by doing so, he got great momentum in his rebellion and his uprising that he orchestrated. Now, in verse 2, we're told that they rose up, and the Hebrew root word for rose up is kum, which means to rise. And we understand it can also have the idea of taking a stand, which is in the positive sense in the use of the word, when we take our stand in the master, especially when we're told, arise, shine, for your light has come. That's the call for us to stand up, be armed in the truth, standing firm in our master as we're armed in the Torah. But in a negative sense, this word can also be used because it's also a standing up, but it's a standing up in opposition to, in hostility against authority, standing up in defiance. And they orchestrated an uprising. You know what was happening when Qoraḥ went to get Dathan, Aviram, and On? There was a riot in the making. It already had begun. And they were rising up against Moshe and Aharon. What they didn't recognize, that to rebel against or rise up against Moshe was rising up and rebelling against the very commands, the Torah of Yahweh. So many people are still doing that today. To rebel and rise against Aharon is to rise and rebel against the work of Yahweh. Not just his word, but the work of Yahweh upon the slaughter place. Because Aharon was put in the position of high priest, which officiated what took place on the slaughter place and in the set-apart place to ensure that people are able to correctly draw near to Yahweh's presence and maintain Yahweh's presence. So to go against or rise up against Aharon ultimately is a picture of being against and rejecting Yeshua Messiah, our high priest, who came only to do everything according to the Torah. And in verse 3, Moshe basically said, enough of you. These rebellious people, they came and gained momentum. They went and gathered another 150 men, or 250 men, and they went not just to gather people that didn't know much in what was going on, they went and took leaders. So this shows us that it was already a problem within the camp. I mean, we've just been through a couple of weeks looking at the last 2 years journeying in the wilderness, and men who were known leaders, people who the masses would look up to for guidance and direction. So getting these 250 leaders, here Qoraḥ and his company thought, hey, now we're going to get momentum against Moshe and Aharon. We're going to change things. This is what they thought. And so they stood up against Moshe and Aharon and declared that they had now had enough. Sorry, the enough of you was the declaration of the rebellious lot. And they stood up against Moshe and Aharon. They said, listen, we've had enough of your leadership. And basically, in a nutshell, what they were saying, when they showed no respect to Moshe and Aharon, they were basically saying, what makes you guys so special? Why do you think you're so special? Because we're all set apart. Those who are unwilling to submit humbly and serve as they should in the community of Israel will always be the ones who have the most to say in a negative reaction to any perceived violation to their personal rights that they might claim to have. The ones who do this naturally are rebelling against Yahweh and his word and Yahweh's appointment for order in the body, and will claim that they have no need to submit to anyone else. I mean, we've literally had people say, I don't need a leader. That just shows clear immaturity. And then they think, I can do what I want. That's a picture that we get through a time when the book of Judges gives us a clear picture of how everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. But that doesn't make it right. It's evil in Yahweh's eyes. This was not the first time that Moshe faced this kind of negative reaction to his leadership and calling. Remember when he was in Mitzrayim and he struck the Mitzrayim for striking one of the Hebrews, and the other Hebrews came and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? And that's when he fled into the wilderness. Little did they know that it was Yahweh who was making Moshe the leader and judge over them. And so in this instance, when Qoraḥ and all those rebellious lot came against Moshe, Moshe humbled himself and fell down. And so I just want to touch on some key lessons that we can learn of the typical tactics of rebellious people, which are those who actually are refusing to submit to authority that Yahweh has called and ordained and set up as a functional way of living in the body of Messiah. Bold rebels, I'll call them, okay? Qoraḥ rebels. Bold rebels will always find others to share in their gripes and will definitely seek out grumblers who they will actually be able to seize in their plot to gain a following of others who will take their side when they feel aggrieved. They are those who don't like when they're not the ones in the leadership roles. They're the ones who don't like it when they're not the ones calling the shots. They will never serve in any way. They'll always find things to moan about with others. They'll carefully seek out people who will actually agree with them. So they're very tactical in who they will gather to fuel their grievances and grumbling. And they'll take anyone who will be swift to bring a false accusation against a leader. Just because they don't like what the leader has said, or they didn't get their way, or they feel that their personal rights have been attacked. You know, a bold rebel, I like calling them that because that's what it is, will get those that they've gathered to identify with their problem and actually look for sympathy. So they'll play on the heartstrings of others, playing on emotions that they've gathered to listen to their gripes. And in the process, they will emotionally manipulate other people because they will fuel their disgruntlement against what they are rebelling against. You know, they'll kind of get others and they will make them feel what they're feeling. And this happens today when someone becomes disgruntled at leadership that Yahweh's called. Because why? Why does somebody get upset with that which Yahweh's called to lead? It's typically because they disagree with the one who's declaring the truth. And when the truth hurts, possibly exposing area of one's life due to compromise or lack of commitment, the rebellious will speak out against a servant leader who makes their compromise known through the word, because it's typically when the word is spoken, the word is a mirror. And when somebody actually looks into the mirror and now they hear a word and they say, why are you speaking against me? I mean, over the years, we've heard that when, you know what, a message has been prepared and then you don't know who's going to listen to the message, but somebody listens and says, why did you make this just against me? You know, it's like, well, look at the mirror and look into the mirror and see what needs to be changed. But when people don't like what they hear, when the truth is being proclaimed, this is when they start getting disgruntled at what's been said. And so it often is the case, and it should be the case, that the mirror of the word should highlight any hypocrisy in our lives so that we get cleaned up. But most people don't want to get cleaned up because they're comfortable in their circumstances and they don't want anybody telling them that what they're doing is wrong. The grumblers will seek anyone that will join in them in their support in agreeing against a leader that they collectively do not like. A bold rebel is a disgruntled rebel that will create a false perception or image of the one that they are disgruntled with. I mean, that just happens in life. I mean, we're talking within a body here that Yahweh's identifying a clear thing that is warned against. And what we must realize is that when anybody that's disgruntled gets other people that don't know what's going on, and he feeds them information and manipulates them emotionally, the people are only getting fueled by the perception of what they're being told. Now, our perceptions are based on what we know, by the evidence that's being presented to us. Disgruntled rebels will always give their side, and anyone being manipulated and drawn into gossip and slander by any negativity and lies will perceive their lies as something truthful. So they'll join in their cause. So you've got to understand that this wasn't just a fleeting moment of Qoraḥ's rebellion. It took careful, constructive planning by this disgruntled rebel. The disgruntled and rebellious one will always assume that Yahweh is on their side. And that being the case, they assume that then Yahweh is naturally against the one that they're against. And so they begin to believe and think that numbers will prove them right. So get as many on your side as you can and you'll show, you see, 250 plus Dathan and Abiram and On, and anyone else that's in my house against Moshe and Aharon, that's a lot of odds against two guys. And so they think with the collective audience of many others that they now have dominant influence by their negativity over Yahweh's appointed leadership. Qoraḥ is guilty of gossip and slander at its peak. You know, and when you have wicked and evil thoughts and hatred toward your brother, which is what he had toward Moshe and Aharon, our master says that's likened to murder. Qoraḥ was guilty of such, leading many people astray, and he was demanding that he must be heard. It's a very dangerous option to take, especially when you're grumbling against Yahweh's chosen order. You know, grumbling fuels and feeds on pride. And it's a picture of a mind that's not being renewed, but is actually it's not being transformed by the renewing of one's mind. It's actually being conformed to whatever grumbling that is fueled in the flesh. unwilling to allow the truth to penetrate and show any areas that need to be adjusted and changed. And so what we see here is a clear picture of humility versus pride. Qoraḥ was standing up for himself, self-imposed rights. Moshe falls down. Picture of a powerful illustration in a literal sense, highlighting the parable of the wheat and the darnel. We know the parable of the wheat and the darnel is one that our master gives as a vital lesson for us, because we also understand this parable teaches us that the two are growing up together. Because it was while men slept that an enemy came and sowed the darnel. And when asked in the parable, should we then uproot? No, let it grow together, lest you pull out some of the wheat. And so it's only at the end of the age, at the harvest time, when you will be able to differentiate between the darnel and the wheat. Because darnel mimics the wheat in its appearance until it comes to harvest time, when the head of wheat gets filled with the moisture and it begins to drop or droop, where the darnel stays upright. And this is when the messengers then are sent out to gather, to reap the harvest and gather the darnel into bundles for judgment, and then the wheat is gathered. This is the picture we get. But what we see here is that we know that the field is the world that our master speaks of, but we understand that it's while men slept at what? Shaul gives us many instructions in the rude writings to wake up from our slumber, to be watchful. The day is drawing near. We should be aware. We should have ears to hear. We shouldn't be asleep to the truth. And Qoraḥ, in his rebellion, is one who's pictured as one that was asleep to hearing what needs to be done. Because there were tasks to be done within Levi. He wasn't doing it. He was just upset he wasn't the one calling the shots. And so we know that the darnel is actually only exposed at harvest time. And so here in this journey, we see a picture of Yahweh exposing the darnel amidst the wheat in a body of people that had been brought out of Mitzrayim. Qoraḥ was unwilling to bow down and submit. And this is a clear picture of darnel that's without an ear for the truth. Because when wheat gets ripe in the ear, it bows down. This is the parable pictures that our master clearly gives us. He wanted to overthrow his cousin and take the place of being high priest by force. That's why he got a mob on his side. What's worth taking note of is that Qoraḥ went and took with him people from Reuben's line, because Dathan, Aviram, and On were great-grandsons of Reuben. Now, we also see a history of Reuben, who had showed stubbornness and rebellion when he defiled his father's bed and lost his firstborn status. So the message to Qoraḥ that Moshe spoke to Qoraḥ and everyone who was with him is still a very clear message that needs to be heard today to everyone who assumes to have their own position of authority of how they live their life. And the Torah speaks clearly to all. By the way you draw near and bring your fire holder. That's still the message today, so to speak. Because by the way you draw near and bring your fire holder is the way you will be known. As to whether it's the correct way to draw near to Yahweh or not. And Yahweh will make known who his chosen is, and he will judge according to his Torah. Many who rebel against the need to submit and walk in the Torah have a very big awakening and shocking sentence that's coming upon the sons of disobedience. There are many rebellious, stiff-necked people who are refusing to walk in the Torah, but then there are those who think they're walking in the Torah but are self-imposed in their shaving of their head, so to speak, because they're rebelling against appointed leadership and assuming to be in their own position. And like I said, Qoraḥ was a leader, but he didn't like the position he was in. He wanted a higher position, and he didn't want to do it Yahweh's way. He wanted to do it his way. You know, there's a clear difference between those who are with Yahweh and submit to walking in his Torah correctly and are fervent and zealous in their obedience of guarding his commands, as opposed to those who just want Yahweh to be with them in their selfish pursuit of trying to claim all the blessings that they demand from the word, yet are clearly unwilling to actually obey in walking in the clear directions of his Torah as revealed through Moshe, or given through Moshe, and revealed through the life, death, and resurrection of Yeshua Messiah. Now, in verse 9, when Moshe confronted the rebels, he was, in a nutshell, saying, listen, enough. Isn't chosen already enough? Is it a small matter that you've actually been chosen by Yahweh? What more do you want? I mean, think about that. Kepha reminds us that we've been called out of darkness into his marvelous light, that we are a chosen race, a chosen race. Yahweh chose us. Yahweh said, the children of Israel are servants to me because he's the one who delivered them out of Mitzrayim. And he chose who he would save according to his loving commitment that he made with Abraham. You know, one of the things we must realize, as Yahweh said, he chose us before we chose him. Because we understand that our choosing is actually an acknowledgement of his choosing of us. And when we acknowledge his choosing of us by choosing him, it's a reciprocal way of going back and forward, if you will. But then we actually realize that we relinquish all further choice for self, because his choosing over us becomes our priority on how we now live set-apart lives. And I think this is what rebellious people do. They want to claim the choosing of Yahweh, yet they want to choose how they live this out, rather than actually relinquish all choice at the choice of his choosing. And now a lot of choice choosing going on, but do you get the idea? Our master came to give us life, to call us out of darkness, so that we can walk in this newness of life and have the promise made secure as we stay in him, that he will come to be in our midst forever. He said in Yochanan 15, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he might give you. And he made it clear that it was his choosing over us that actually what everything is all about. And the fact that he chose us and he gave us the choice to accept that choosing is a gift. And that's what Moshe is saying. Isn't it enough to be chosen by Yahweh? What more do you want? This is where Shaul goes on about the body and each part doing its work. And this is what Qoraḥ didn't understand. He wanted to be another part of the body that he wasn't. Being chosen by Yahweh is enough. Now, whether you've been given an appointment of position in authority in the body of Yahweh or not, and whether you are just called to submit to that, then we should be content at our choosing. And as we grow and bear fruit that lasts, Yahweh certainly can position us as we are needed within the body. Now, the choice to serve Yahweh is one that we make when we make our confession of the one that's chosen us. Because Yahweh actually chose for all mankind to be saved, but not all accept that choosing and choose that choice. And so we need to realize this is where people don't realize, I think, many immature believers lack the ability to recognize Yahweh's choosing and what that really means. You know? Qoraḥ wanted the priesthood. He didn't understand everything about the priesthood and what service was entailed in the priesthood. Dathan and Abiram are a picture, because you've got two different, now you've got Dathan and Abiram from Reuben. So they weren't priests, but they're still within the body and they're still rising up against the leadership. But what we get from them is a picture also of rebellion, but in a different kind of way to Qoraḥ. Qoraḥ wanted the priesthood. He wanted the position. He wanted to be in the headlights, you know. Dathan and Abiram, all they wanted was the good life now. In the spotlights, in the headlights, the spotlights. Okay. So we see, in a sense, a clear picture of two agendas brewing out of this uprising. One was for the priesthood and power to rule over another or others. The other was fueling the fleshly desires and lusts of this world being completely satisfied, getting what I want, what I see with my eyes. This is a picture of what we see in a false presentation of religious worship, where what we've all came out from in inherited lies is a system that seeks to hold spiritual power as well as worldly wealth. So it's a combination of that. Seeking to be in control of a one world system where they pull the strings to enslave people under their authority that actually runs contrary to the authority of Elohim. One of the problems that Qoraḥ and his rebellion picture for us today is the reality of how some will cause fighting and striving within the body. Why? Yaakov reminds us, where does it come from? When you don't have what you want. When you don't get what you want. That's what it comes down to. So clearly Qoraḥ didn't relinquish all choice when he accepted the choice to come out of Mitzrayim. Because remember, the acceptance of the choice to come out of Mitzrayim began when the houses put blood on the doorposts. And so by accepting Yahweh's covering protection and being delivered and coming out of slavery, but then not long afterwards, we get people starting to, like Qoraḥ and the rebellion, starting to say, hey, yes, oh, remember the leeks, remember the garlic, remember this, remember how it was. Oh, no, walking in this way of Yahweh, it was quite fine, gone through the honeymoon phase, so to speak. Now, going into it, we don't like this anymore. They were rebelling against their leaders. Hebrews 13 warns us very clearly not to rebel against those who are appointed to lead you. Verse 7 and 17, remember those leading you, who spoke the word of Elohim to you. Consider the outcome of the way of their life and imitate their belief. In verse 17, obey those leading you and be subject to them, for they watch for your lives as having to give an account. Let them do so with joy and not groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. Then Moshe calls Dathan and Aviram, and you know what? He calls for them. They refuse to come. And instead, they start making slanderous accusations from a distance. And that's what we see happening today. The ones who are criticizing and making rash statements of slander and negative gossip will always be from a distance. You'll hear it in the WhatsApp chats or you'll hear it, I'm just using today's language, You'll hear it in the little rumblings or things that are sent back and forward. Negative gossip from a distance. That's what people will do from a distance. They'll bend the truth. Now, when you bend the truth, it's no longer truth. And this is what Dathan and Aviram did. They're accusing Moshe of taking them away from the land of milk and honey. And that Moshe was just trying to seize total rule over them. I mean, think about that for a moment. This is a serious thing. When people twist the word of Yahweh, rebellion against the instructions of Yahweh, his Torah, will cause one to rebel against a freedom that Yahweh has brought to people who were once enslaved by dogmas of man. But they prefer that somehow. They wanted to go back to Mitzrayim. They were highly upset with Moshe for leading them here and bringing them out to die in the wilderness, clearly showing no trust in Yahweh. Yahweh's chosen leader was to instruct them and guide them to the land that Yahweh had promised to give them, yet they didn't want to follow because of some of the hardships on the way. The accusation against Moshe in saying Moshe wanted to seize total rule over them is a typical response of so many today. Oh, you just want to tell me what to do. Stop trying to tell me what to do. Or you're trying to put me under law. I mean, that's the typical response. But even coming into those who think they're in subjection to the law don't like being told what the law is telling them what to do by those appointed to tell them what to do. So many misguided rebels today think that when they're told what to do, all you're trying to do is put me to death. But not realizing, as Devarim tells us, it's not a worthless word for us, it's our life. Dathan and Aviram accusing Moshe, a picture of the Torah, of taking them away from the land of milk and honey, where in fact they were on their way to the land of milk and honey. When Israel were in Mitzrayim, they didn't have the Torah. They were enslaved to a world system. And that is what Dathan and Aviram and On wanted to go back to. It's crazy. As soon as people come out of corruption, it's almost like this nice feeling. Oh, we got something new. But when it gets down to just daily obedience and proper submission to order, in a world that breeds lawlessness, it becomes very difficult now to actually submit because You know, especially after 2 years. I mean, they're in their second year journey here. They all thought, okay, we've all heard Yahweh. We've all heard the instructions. Why do we need to keep listening to you now? Now we know what's the instructions. We can do it ourselves. Isn't that what a lot of people are doing today? Mishle 28 verse 4 says, those who forsake the Torah praise the wrong. Those who guard the Torah strive with them. This is what we see here with Qoraḥ, Dathan, and Aviram. They were striving against Moshe as a picture of the Torah. They were forsaking the requirements to follow the leading and instructions of Moshe, and praised each other in their own wrong ways, and even began to praise Mitzrayim as being the promised land rather than the land that Yahweh was leading them to. And we see that their inability to see the truth increased as they blamed Moshe for not having brought them into the promised land yet, and had now taken them from the promised land, so to speak. It was as if it's Moshe's fault. You know, when things don't go right for people because they have compromise in their life, suddenly it's the one who's been teaching them the Torah, it's their fault. You know, quickly forget, how quickly they had fallen prey to the negative report of the 10 spies. They got the report that the land is good. They didn't listen to Caleb and Yehoshua saying, let's get going because this is our land that Yahweh's given us. We're excited, let's go. They saw the fruit of the land, but yet they believed the negativity of they couldn't overcome. Let's just go back and be slaves again. It's crazy. They didn't like the leadership. They didn't like being told what to do by Aharon and Moshe. Qoraḥ certainly didn't like the fact that his cousin, who was in birth order after him, being in a higher position. Dathan and Aviram, they just caught on to the negativity. And so they actually start almost joining in with the rebellion against the priesthood. They had no right actually to be even part. Nobody should be rebelling, but you got this picture of people who had no interest in position in the order of Levi coming in and having their say. Moshe becomes displeased. He was getting Moshe, you know what? He was just a man like any of us, and he was getting a bit angry, and he tells Yahweh, don't accept their offering. This is very serious. He says, I didn't take anybody's donkey. I've done no harm to anybody. And these are similar words that we see Shemuel speaking in Shemuel Aleph 12 verse 3. We're going to look at that passage a bit later. But in verse 3 he says, look here, I'm witness. Look here, I witness before me, before Yahweh and before his appointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Who have I oppressed? Whom have I abused? Or from whose hand have I received any bribe to with which to blind my eyes? Then I'll restore it to you. This is when they wanted a king. In other words, they didn't like the way they were being told to live, and Yahweh as sovereign. One's ox or donkey is a picture of what one would use to plow the field or carry a burden or load of goods. Moshe and Shemuel were both making it clear to a rebellious people that they had never taken advantage of anyone, and they never laid a heavy burden upon them. Our master came in the flesh. He said, take my yoke, it's easy, my burden, it's light. Our master came to bring us back to obedience, and it's not a thing that's very heavy for us to take. It's actually the light burden, the easy yoke that we are to put upon ourselves. And what Moshe and Shemuel were saying was basically the same thing. And we see a powerful picture of the Torah and the prophets being something that's not burdensome. The test was, bring your fire holder and we'll see. 250 leaders had been gathered in this joint rebellion with Qoraḥ and his men. They're now told, get your fire holder, bring them and assemble before the tent of appointment. Qoraḥ might have thought, this is it, now I'm going with a great charge, He might have even seen this as one of the best moments that he's got to now kick Moshe and Aharon out of their position. At this point, the esteem of Yahweh appears, and Yahweh speaks to Moshe. And he says, separate yourselves from the congregation so that I can wipe these people out in a moment. Once again, Moshe and Aharon fall on their faces and intercede for the congregation and appeal to Yahweh. Moshe, although he was very angry, he knew that it was not the whole congregation that was guilty. And here a clear separation is made when Yahweh tells Moshe to speak to Israel and command them to move away from the tents of these rebels and the ringleaders. Moshe then went and spoke to the congregation, and in verse 26 he says, "Turn away from these wrong men and do not touch what belongs to them, or else you're going to be consumed too." Now the Hebrew word for turn away is sur, which means to turn aside, depart, or be removed from. And the instruction is very clear here. Turn away, leave, depart, come out from among them. To touch something is a picture in the Hebrew mindset of engaging, being part of. Because you use your hand. Your hand speaks of what you do and your work. And the Greek word that's used in the Septuagint, haptomai, means to touch or fasten to or cling to. And in 2 Corinthians 6 verse 17, we see in Shaul's letter, "Come out from among them and be separate, says Yahweh. Touch not the unclean, and I shall receive you." So we understand that this is exactly, Shaul was quoting from Yeshayahu, a clear call to come out from the corruption, come out from wrong ways, rebellious ways. Don't carry on in them because you'll get consumed if you do. Chazon gives the same warning. Come out from her midst, lest you be consumed. Shaul warns the believers in Colossae. In Colossians 2, verse 20 to 22, it says, "If then you died with Messiah from the elementary matters of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourself to dogmas? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which are all to perish with use according to the commands and teachings of men." Now, many have twisted Shaul's words and used this passage to say, you see, why are you subjecting your... People present this passage as if Shaul was saying, why are you subjecting yourself again to the Torah? When they clearly don't understand that the Colossians never had the Torah before Shaul brought it to them. And so when he brought the good news to them and realizing how they have to die to self and receive the resurrection power of Messiah and now walk in his Torah, his easy yoke or his and light burden, that they had been going back to their dogmas and teachings of man. And that's what Shaul was saying here. Why are you now, when you've actually died with Messiah, because when we pass through the waters, we are dying with Messiah in his death, but to be raised to newness of life in his resurrection power that should now live in us, guarding our lives from going back to old ways of the dogmas and teachings of man. Shaul says, don't touch, don't taste, don't handle. This is a lesson for all of us. We've come out of corrupt ways. We shouldn't be touching, tasting, or handling it. We shouldn't be engaging in that which we have come out from and separated ourselves from, because that's going to simply be a mixing that will cause you to face serious consequences of not being separated. Chazon 18 says, "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues." Yeshayahu 52 verse 11 says, turn aside, come out from there, touch not the unclean, come out of her midst, be clean, you who bear the vessels of Yahweh. Yirmiyahu 51 verse 6 says, "Flee from the midst of Babel, and let each one save his life. Do not be cut off in her crookedness, for this is the time of the vengeance of Yahweh, the recompense he is repaying her." Yirmiyahu 51 verse 45 says, "Come out of her midst, my people, and let everyone deliver his being from the burning displeasure of Yahweh." I've mentioned all these passages to remind us the clear call that Yahweh is giving to not touch, not handle, and not engage with that which is in rebellion to a proper submission to the orders and the commands, the Torah of Yahweh. Because when one rebels against the Torah of Yahweh, one's ability to possess the witness of Yeshua Messiah becomes non-existent. And so Yechezkel 2 verse 3, Israel were described as being rebels when it said, "Son of man, I am sending you to the children of Israel, a nation of rebels who have rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me until this day." Rebels rebel. Okay, that's just how it is. And what we see from this instruction to turn away, given by Moshe, is a clear call to turn away from those who have turned away. That is what it means to come out and be separate. Turn away from those who refuse to obey. It doesn't mean we're not alike to people, but it means that we do not engage in doing the practices of those who have turned away from being obedient. You don't join in with them. Moshe said that if these men died as all other men died, then it would be clear that it's not Yahweh who's sent him with this message. But if something happens that's unheard of, and it's like, this has never happened before, then this is Yahweh. And as soon as Moshe finished speaking, the earth opened up and swallowed all these rebels. I mean, what a sight. So many people today are procrastinating in their need to come out and be separate. This is a very dangerous thing. We must hear this call and reminder to consistently be living set-apart lives that aren't engaging in rebellious ways or ways of uprising that speak against the appointed order of Yahweh. In verse 35, we see that the fire consumes 250 leaders who were offering incense. In 2 Thessalonians 1 verse 8, it says, in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who do not know Elohim and on those who do not obey the good news of our Master, Yeshua Messiah. This is a clear picture of the wrath of Yahweh that's coming upon those who are not obeying. We see Eleazar is then instructed to take the 250 fire holders, these rebels who were bringing their incense. It carries a picture of so many who claim to be believers, thinking that their prayers and their service is actually acceptable to Elohim, yet when the fiery wrath of Elohim comes, they're going to be destroyed. Eleazar is told, go and fetch the 250 holders of those who had been consumed, beat them into plates for the slaughter place as a reminder to not rebel against Yahweh, and that no stranger who is not of the seed of Aharon should ever come to offer incense before Yahweh. There was a clear statement being made here, and that is very clear that there's only one mediator, an intercessor, and none of these men who were consumed would ever be able to be the one who intercedes on behalf of the nation. So Yahweh was making it very clearly known to everybody that this is his order, this is the way he is, and this is not to be rebelled against. We're reminded in Hebrews 4 verse 14 to 16 that since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Yeshua, the Son of Elohim, let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who was tried in all respects as we are, apart from sin. Therefore, let us come boldly to the throne of favor in order to receive compassion and find favor for timely help. This carries a sobering warning against those who rebel against the Torah of Elohim, while thinking that they have access to the provisions given to us in a covenants of promise. And when we considered these events that took place, and when we consider that we have a high priest in the heavens, we should be on guard against rebelling against his order, because that's a Qoraḥ rebellion. You know, this all happens. The uprising, Qoraḥ and Dathan and Abiram being swallowed up, the 250 leaders being destroyed by fire. And as if everyone didn't now know whose authority it is that they should be listening to, they begin to moan again. I mean, they saw the 10 spies being dealt with, the 10 spies who brought the negative report. They saw Qoraḥ and all his company that were with him being destroyed. They saw the 250 being consumed by fire, yet they persist in moaning against Moshe and Aharon. So many people today, believe it or not, just won't stop complaining. And they are unable to actually be corrected. Not unable, unwilling. Once again, they accuse Moshe and Aharon. You killed these people. Moshe and Aharon didn't kill them. The spiritually blind will always misinterpret the word and work of Yahweh, and they will, with great aggression, with their words, come against the appointed of Yahweh. Yahweh again tells Moshe to leave this people so he can consume them in a moment. Once again, Moshe and Aharon fall on their faces. This is a picture of a great heart of intercession. Something that we can learn a great lesson from, as I am sure that That's why none of us are Moshe and Aharon, because how many of us would have said, okay, I'll step aside, start over. Here we have Moshe and Aharon collectively reflecting a picture of our master in the flesh, coming with compassion as a servant to intercede on our behalf and take the sting of death so that we can have the resurrection power of life. And with that, the responsibility of proper submission and being done with all form of rebellion and pride. Yahweh tells Moshe to arise from amidst the congregation. And this is the third time in this chapter that we see Yahweh speaking to Moshe, instructing him to move away and be separated. Twice he spoke directly to Moshe so that Yahweh could consume them in a moment. That's in verse 12 and verse 21 and verse 45. And once as an instruction to the congregation to move away from the tents of the rebels. That's in verse 24. So here we see this idea of separate, move away, and arise. So this takes action on behalf of everyone. You can't just separate yourselves from rebellion when you're not actually getting up and getting out, and getting up and taking a stand of the truth. So that here we see now Moshe instructs Aharon to go and put incense on the slaughter place and intercede. And in the time that Aharon gets up to go and put incense on the golden slaughter place to intercede on behalf of the people, over 14,000 were destroyed in the plague that Yahweh sent. And so we see this here. There was Yahweh sending destruction. And Moshe and Aharon, again, showing humility, but yet urgency in intercession, is a picture of the love that our master, the compassion that our master has. Look, he's not leaving anyone unpunished, but he certainly will take on the punishment of those that call upon him, upon himself. And that is what his work in the flesh of man came to do. There was a rebellion going on. In other words, it was very chaotic at this time in the nation. You've got to think it was riot after riot, things going on and everybody being challenged. Nobody stopped and thought, hey, hold on, why aren't we supposed to be going forward? They rather wanted to go backward, new leadership. Nobody was wanting to take their own responsibility. Well, Qoraḥ wanted to be the leader. And Yahweh came to restore order out of the chaos here very quickly. And this is what our master came to do when he came in the flesh of man. He came to restore and bring back into order his prescribed order for his people. And anyone that's opposed to his order and his kingdom rules will die. This rebellion caused great destruction. Another 14,700 had died. And what we learn from this is rebellion kills. It's an obvious. And we must learn to guard our mouths and be careful against speaking out against the order of Elohim. Be careful who we speak out against, especially if they are called set-apart servants of Elohim. There are procedures to follow when one has an accusation against a leader. But to cause an uprising against Yahweh's appointed will only cause one to be in danger of being destroyed. Let's carry on to chapter 17 and Yahweh's clear appointment of who's in charge and who's not. Okay, Jackie.
And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and take from them a rod, from each father's house, all the leaders according to their father's houses, 12 rods. Write each one's name on his rod, and write Aharon's name on the rod of Levi, for there is one rod for the head of each father's house. You shall then place them in the tent of appointment before the witness, where I meet with you. And it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose buds, and I shall rid myself of the grumblings of the children of Israel, which they grumble against you. And Moshe spoke to the children of Israel and to all their leaders, and Moshe spoke to the children of Israel, and all their leaders gave him a rod each, for each leader according to their father's houses, 12 rods, and the rod of Aharon was among their rods. So Moshe placed the rods before Yahweh in the tent of the witness. And it came to be on the next day that Moshe went into the tent of the witness and saw that the rod of Aharon of the house of Levi had budded, and brought forth buds, and blossomed, and bore ripe almonds. And Moshe brought out all the rods from before Yahweh and all the children of Israel. And they looked, and each man took his rod. And Yahweh said to Moshe, Bring Aharon's rod back before the witness, to be kept as a sign against the rebels, so that you put an end to their grumblings against me, lest they die. And Moshe did as Yahweh had commanded him, so he did. And the children of Israel spoke to Moshe, saying, See, we shall die, we shall perish, we shall all perish. Anyone who comes near the dwelling place of Yahweh dies. Shall we be consumed to die?
The plague had stopped. Right order had now been restored in the camp, and it was time to put an end to any debates and questions in regards to the authority and leadership that Yahweh had established and ordained, so that this people could actually get on their journey to the land that he had promised them. And despite all the grumblings and all the complaints that have been going on, especially against Moshe and Aharon, we continue to see that Yahweh speaks through Moshe. Yahweh didn't change because of the rebels, you know. Yahweh wasn't interested whether Moshe was a popular choice or not. Neither does he today. He does not go and give roles of leadership to someone else based on the grumbling that took place. You know, just because everybody was grumbling against Moshe and Aharon, he didn't say, oh, well, let me give them who they want to listen to. You know, that's actually what happened when a rebellious nation was asking for a sovereign, and he gave them King Shaul. As a sign to them, you see, when you get what you want, it's not good for you. When we do what Yahweh wants, we realize that it's good for us because he knows best. Sometimes people think that if they moan and groan long enough, they'll get a change in leadership and get the person that they want as opposed to the one that Yahweh's called and chosen. But Yahweh doesn't fall for unmerited claims of complaints against his appointed. So this wicked and rebellious generation, Yahweh was to give them a sign that only he would be able to bring. This is a great shadow picture of the wicked and adulterous generation that would be given only one sign, the sign of Yonah that our master said when they asked him to show us. You know, they said, show us a sign. Now, we don't need the sign of Yonah if we're walking in righteousness. 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, just as Yonah was in the belly of a fish. We don't need that sign if we're walking in righteousness. It's a sign for the wicked and adulterous, and it's the only sign that would be given. And so it was a reminder against those who had rebelled against the word of Yahweh, because Yonah was one that rebelled against Yahweh's commission to go and call people back to the Torah. So that would be the sign. Here, Yahweh is giving a sign with the rods that are brought, you know. And so in this wilderness, Yahweh was going to put away, well, he did put away and put an end to any grumbling about who was in charge. Now, we know Yahweh's in charge, but in terms of who he appoints to lead the people according to his word. And therefore, the entire nation was now called to bring one rod from each tribe, 12 rods, each from their father's house. Take the rod from each leader of the 12 tribes, write the names of the leader on the rods, and then Aaron would write his name on the rod for Levi. And we know in Scripture that a rod is a symbol of authority. And a rod highlights a clear picture of authority of the one who is equipped and appointed to lead and to teach. And here it was going to be revealed who the true leader that Yahweh had appointed was. And who is the one that everyone should now submit to and serve and follow under the hand of Moshe. So a leader that Yahweh's appointed will always be under the hand of Moshe. Today, that means that any leader that's not leading according to the Torah as its basis and foundation is not a called leader of Yahweh. All the rods were then placed in the tent of appointment before the witness, and the rod that would bud would be the one that Yahweh would choose. And this would bring an end to all grumbling, because this would be a miracle in itself. It's Yahweh who chooses and not man. Yeshayahu 42 verse 1 says, See, my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one, my being has delighted in. I have put my spirit upon him. He brings forth right ruling to the nations. So these 12 rods, every rod having the name of the leader of each tribe of Israel, in the tent of appointment. Now these were rods. Now we must understand these were rods that would be branches from trees. And so one of them having something bud from them would be a miracle, because these are dead sticks. Okay, let's just call it what it is. And so this would clarify very clearly the one who Yahweh had called, and all the other presumed leaders would be brought down and put back into their rightful place. Yechezkel 17 verse 24 says, all the trees of the field shall know that I, Yahweh, have brought down the high tree and exalted the low tree, dried up the green tree and made the dry tree flourish. I, Yahweh, have spoken and shall do it. Aharon's rod, we must remind ourselves, was once Moshe's rod. In Shemot 4 verse 1 to 17, we are able to see that it was the rod that was in Moshe's hand that would do that Aharon would do all the signs that he was told to do. And this rod being put into Aharon's hand, we see Aharon's rod being put forward in the leadership of Levi is collectively representing the authority of Moshe and Aharon that Yahweh is called, because Moshe would be as an Elohim to Aharon, Aharon would be the mouthpiece. So we see a clear picture of, again, the authority by which our master came in the flesh of man. He only came by the authority of the word. He only came to do that which is instructed in the word, showing that he himself subjected himself to his own word and not changed his word, because he came to fully proclaim and meet the requirements of his very own word that brings life. Aaron's authority was that of Moshe, as he was Moshe's spokesman. As the high priest's authority is that of the Torah, for it's by the plumb line of the Torah that his righteous right rulings are brought forth. And so Yehoshua derived his authority from the Torah. When he was in the flesh of man, he is the word made flesh, but he derived the authority that he had in the flesh of man from the Torah. He didn't derive it from any other place other than that which he has prescribed. He's referred to as the rod in the prophets. In Micah chapter 6 verse 9, it says, the voice of Yahweh cries to the city, and let sound wisdom see your name. Hear the rod and him who appointed it. So listen to the rod, listen to the authority. Here is the branch of Yishai. Here is the rod. He is the mediator between Israel and Yahweh, foreshadowed by the picture of the priesthood of that Aharon officiated as high priest in the order of Levi. As we know, the name of Aharon means light bringer, as a shadow picture of the light that would be brought forth. What we learn from these accounts is a shadowing or foreshadowing of the authenticity of Yeshua Messiah, is that in any leadership that Yahweh has appointed, he will choose by the one who blossoms in his leadership in the light of the witnesses to the covenant. He does not need to choose the one who's got the most degrees or the most accolades of man, but he chooses the one who's bearing the fruit. Aharon's rod bore fruit while the other rods did not. And in Scripture, we are told that we are able to distinguish true leadership against the false fruit that they bear. When our master warned us, he told us to beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. Inwardly, they're actually savage wolves. When he says, by their fruits, you shall know them. And then he gives a clear picture of, are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? The obvious answer is no. He says, therefore, every good tree yields good fruit. So he was likening this. So he says, you know what? You'll be able to see by the fruit of a leader whether it is of Yahweh or not. We just mentioned this Torah portion is about making oneself bald on their head, their beards. That should already be an immediate warning sign. When a so-called leader in the Torah doesn't have a beard or a shaped beard or shaved part of their beard or part of their head bald, that it's not Yahweh's leadership. I mean, why can't we accept this clear standard today? Oh no, but he says nice things. Oh no, but I can take the meat from what he's... Stop it, you're rebelling. And I don't know how much to say to those who have ears not to hear, except please have ears to hear. Don't listen to those that Yahweh has not appointed, by the clear fact that you can see by the fruit of their lives that they are false. I mean, this is a serious thing. There's a lot of Qoraḥ rebellion going on today within the body, and crowds that are rising up in that rebellion. Aharon's rod budded, and it brought forth ripe almonds. You've got to think about this for a moment. As I said, this is a miracle, a dead stick bringing forth ripe almonds in an instant. Maybe one night, okay, but that's an instant in the concept of time. The Hebrew word for almond, I'll remind you, shaked, comes from the root of the same spelling, shakad, which means to watch or keep or to lie awake. In other words, you're not asleep. So we get this idea, this picture through the almond branch or almonds and the almond blossoms that are coming forth. It teaches us valuable lessons to be awake, to be alert, to be watchful. In fact, when Yirmiyahu was called and appointed by Yahweh as a youth, the word of Yahweh came to Yirmiyahu in chapter 1, and he said, "What do you see, Yirmiyahu?" And he said, "I see a branch of an almond tree." And Yahweh said to me, "You have seen well, for I am watching over my word to do it." Now, the almond tree is shaked, and the Hebrew word for watching over is shakad, from which shaked comes. So we see a wonderful play on words here. We are to be a people in the Master who are awake, watchful, guarding the Torah, not to be found sleeping, lest the enemy come so donnell in our hearts, and unable to bear the fruit of righteousness. The budding of the almonds was a statement that was clear to the entire nation of Israel, and that they were to be a people that are alert. And being alert, be on guard against these savage wolves that are arising, and turn away from them. Yeshua reminds us to be a people that are awake. In Matthew 24, verse 42, it says, "Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour the Master is coming." In Matthew 25, he says, "Watch therefore, because you do not know the day nor the hour in which the Son of Adam is coming." Matthew 26, verse 41, he says, "Watch and pray, lest you enter into the trial. The spirit indeed is eager, but the flesh is weak." Chazon 2, message given to one of the assemblies was to wake up and strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your works complete before Elohim. Remember then how you have received and heard, and watch and repent. If then you do not wake up, I shall come upon you as a thief, and you shall not know at what hour I come upon you. Marcos 13, verse 33 says, "Take heed and watch, and pray, for you do not know what the time is." Lucas 21, verse 36, "Watch then at all times, and pray that you may be counted worthy to escape all that is about to take place, and to stand before the Son of Adam." So I mentioned a whole lot of verses from the renewed writings, which are clearly telling us to watch. And the Greek word that's used here for watch in 4 of these passages is Gregorio, which means to be awake, to be staying awake, to be watchful, to be alert. And it comes from the verb egero, which means to wake up, to rise up, to awaken. And in the other 2 passages of the 6 that I just mentioned, the Greek word for watch is agrupneo, which means to be sleepless, to be wakeful, keep on alert, and to keep watch. And so we understand this clear message being given to us is that we must be alert and watchful. And Aharon's rod is the symbol of the authority of the word of Yahweh. Aharon's rod budded, and all the other rods didn't bud. And so here we see a clear establishment of the authority of Yahweh being set firmly in the midst of everybody. A picture of the plumb line being set in the midst. And Amos 7, Amos is shown a number of visions. And he keeps interceding to ask Yahweh, but this can't happen. How can they survive when the fire is coming, when the wrath is coming? And then in verse 7, Yahweh stood on a wall made with a plumb line. And with a plumb line in his hand, Yahweh said to me, "Amos, what do you see?" And I said, "I see a plumb line." And Yahweh said, "I am setting my plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. No longer do I pardon them. And the high places of Yitzchak shall be laid waste, and the set apart places of Israel shall be destroyed. And I shall rise with the sword against the house of Yerovam." The house of Yerovam, the first sovereign of the house of Israel, was one that already established corrupt worship away from the order of Levi and the how to draw near to Yahweh. Now, a plumb line, the Hebrew word for plumb line, anach. A plumb line is a plummet, a plumb line, or a lead weight. But what is a plumb line? It's an instrument that's used to help build straight and upright. It's a length of string or a light rope with a weight on it. It comes from the Latin plumbum, okay, meaning lead, or plumum if you have a silent B, okay? I like plumbum. And the lead that's attached to the end, suspended on the rope or the string, would be able to make sure that you're not building skew. Okay? What Yahweh was showing Amos here is a clear vision of how Israel would now be measured against his clear Torah. And that they had been out of line, they didn't measure up to the clear building standards of set apartness, and they were going to be judged. And no more was he going to pardon crookedness. And this is a clear witness when our Master came in the flesh of man. This is where there is now no more excuse for ignorance. But Yahweh commands everyone everywhere to repent. And as we look at the imagery of a plumb line, we know that it pictures for us, I know you're all laughing at my Latin, it pictures for us the standard of righteousness. We know righteousness, Devarim tells us it's to God to do what Yahweh commands us. And that's the plumb line that's been set. It hasn't been changed. Our Master didn't come to do away with the plumb line. He came as the plumb line in the flesh of man to establish the clear order of obedience to being built up as living stones as the dwelling place of Elohim according to his Torah. And therefore, what Yahweh's word reveals when we look into the mirror of the word is any crookedness by which our lives are being built up in error. And it's able to measure the standard of Yahweh's word against our lives. And therefore, when we look intently into the word, we must not forget what we look like, or we must not rebel against the standard by which we are to be built. We must not rebel against those appointed, teaching us the standard by which we are to be built. Here in this Torah portion, a clear testing was taking place as each tribe was to bring a rod for testing. And the rod that blossomed would be the one that Yahweh's appointed. Aaron's rod blossomed, it bore ripe almonds. We also know the almond tree is usually a tree that blossoms first in the season of the fruit trees coming forth. And it's also the last to bear fruit. So it brings forth the bud and the flowers, and it's the last of the fruit trees to actually bring forth the fruit. So it's typically known as the last and first, the Aleph and the Tav tree, which is a powerful picture again of the powerful resurrection power that we have in our Master as we submit to his authority. We also know the almond blossom plays a significant role for us in reminding us to guard the word, because on the menorah there were 22 almond blossoms that were to be made, representing the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, highlighting for us the light of the word that we are to remain in and guard as we submit to the authority of our Master's Torah. Aaron's rod was placed before the witness as a sign against the rebels. And the next time that there would be any kind of rebellion against Moshe would be, look at Aaron's rod, be reminded. And this should hopefully quickly shut up anybody that would rebel. Did you want to share something?
It's with the witness. So
It's with the witness.
you can't look at it.
Yeah. You know? And so here's the final breakthrough. It took the death of almost 15,000 people to bring about the reality and authority of Yahweh's appointed leadership. The congregation recognized their guilt, and the actions have consequences. And if they got what they really deserved, they would have been in big trouble. We have a high priest who intercedes for us and has done according to the plumb line of the Torah. Because of his life, death, and resurrection, we acknowledge and accept our guilt before him. And he's the one, as long as we stay in him, will cause us to blossom and bear fruit that lasts. The key lesson that we get as we're going through this Torah portion and following on from the last 2 weeks is do not grumble. You know, submit and obey. because then if you don't, it won't be good for you. Chapter 18.
And Yahweh said to Aaron, You and your sons and your father's house with you are to bear the crookedness against the set-apart place, and you and your sons with you are to bear the crookedness against your priesthood. But bring with you your brothers of the tribe of Levi too, the tribe of your father, to join you and serve you while you and your sons are with you before the tent of the witness. And they shall guard your charge and the duty of all the tent, but they do not come near the furnishings of the set-apart place and the slaughter place, lest they die, both they and you. And they shall be joined with you and guard the duty of the tent of appointment, for all the service of the tent, but a stranger does not come near you. And you shall guard the duty of the set-apart place and the duty of the slaughter place, so that there be no more wrath on the children of Israel. And see, I myself have taken your brothers the Levites from the midst of the children of Israel, a gift to you, given by Yahweh, to do the service of the tent of appointment. But you and your sons with you are to guard your priesthood for all matters at the slaughter place and behind the veil, and you shall serve. I have given you the priesthood as a gift for service, but the stranger who comes near is put to death. And Yahweh spoke to Aaron, And see, I myself have also given you the charge of my contributions, all the set-apart gifts of the children of Israel. I have given them to you for the anointing, and to your sons as a law forever. This is yours of the most set-apart gifts from the fire, all their offerings, all their grain offerings, and all their sin offerings, and all their guilt offerings which they render to me, are most set apart for you and your sons. Eat it in the most set-apart place. Every male eats it. It is set apart to you. This also is yours, the contribution of their gift, with all the wave offerings of the children of Israel. I have given them to you and your sons and daughters with you as a law forever. Everyone who is clean in your house eats it. All the best of the oil and all the best of the new wine and the grain, their first fruits which they give to Yahweh, I have given them to you. The first fruits of all that is in their land, which they bring to Yahweh, are yours. Everyone who is clean in your house eats it. All that is dedicated in Israel is yours. Everyone opening a womb of all flesh, which they bring to Yahweh, whether man or beast, is yours. But to ransom, you shall ransom the firstborn of man, and the firstborn of the unclean beast you ransom. And ransom their ransomed ones when 1 new moon old, according to your valuation, 5 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the set-apart place, which is 20 gerahs. But the firstborn of a cow, or the firstborn of a sheep, or the firstborn of a goat you do not ransom, they are set apart. Sprinkle their blood on the slaughter place, and burn their fat as an offering made by fire for a sweet fragrance to Yahweh. And their flesh is yours, as the wave breast and as the right thigh, it is yours. All the contributions of the set-apart gifts which the children of Israel present to Yahweh, I have given to you and your sons and daughters with you as a law forever. It is a covenant of salt forever before Yahweh with you and your seed with you. And Yahweh said to Aaron, You are not to have an inheritance in their land, nor have any portion in their midst. I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel. And see, I have given the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance in return for the service which they are serving, the service of the tent of appointment. And let the children of Israel no more come near the tent of appointment, lest they bear sin and die. Because the Levites shall do the service of the tent of appointment, so they themselves bear their crookedness, a law forever throughout your generations, that among the children of Israel they are to have no inheritance. But the tithes of the children of Israel, which they present as a contribution to Yahweh, I have given to the Levites as an inheritance. That is why I have said to them, Among the children of Israel they have no inheritance. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the Levites and say to them, When you take from the children of Israel the tithes which I have given you from them as your inheritance, then you shall present a contribution of it to Yahweh, a tenth of the tithe. And your contribution shall be reckoned to you as grain from the threshing floor and as filling from the winepress. Thus you shall present a contribution unto Yahweh from all your tithes which you receive from the children of Israel, and you shall give from it the contribution to Yahweh to Aaron the priest. From all your gifts you present every contribution due to Yahweh, from all the best of them, the set apart part of them. And you shall say to them, When you have presented the best of it, then the rest shall be reckoned to the Levites as the yield of the threshing floor and as the yield of the winepress. And you shall eat it in any place, you and your household, for it is your reward for your service in the tent of appointment. And bear no sin because of it, when you have presented the best of it, and do not profane the set-apart gifts of the children of Israel, lest you die.
Okay, we come to a chapter that clearly outlines the fact that serving Yahweh is a privilege. It's not a chore. It's not a burdensome, heavy, I have to do this, but it's a privilege. It's a gift. and we are to serve Yahweh cheerfully. Now, when we go through this chapter, we're looking at the instructions. As we've been through a bit of rebellion, Yahweh's establishing now a clear order, whose authority is in charge, who he's put in charge, and what system he's put in charge. Therefore, the rest of the nation mustn't rebel against it. And he's establishing again, listen, Aharon, I've given the Levites to you as a gift. This is a service. This is what must be done. This is what the rest of the people must do to make sure that this service continues and that there are no unclean matters, no destruction must come in your midst. You guard this duty. So we see from this passage, Yahweh establishing or making it once again clear that there's an order. And this order must be maintained, and it must be functional to maintain Yahweh's presence. So within this chapter, we see there are certain things that we see in terms of a shadow picture of the Levitical priesthood now in the order of Melchizedek. It's again a wheel within a wheel, because we know in the body of Messiah there are those appointed, like the Levites were separated for service on behalf of the nation. So too in the body of Messiah there are, if you will, the Levites of today under the order of Melchizedek. But the entire body of Messiah still is one that guards the duty and service of a set-apart people, proclaiming who our master is. And so there's this wheel within a wheel. So there's a clear picture of what's required from all of us collectively to be guarding the duty of service, because the entire nation of Israel was servants to Yahweh. So this isn't, service only belongs to those appointed or to the Levites, but it's a body that serves. But within that body, how does the body maintain an intact service? Well, submitting to the appointed order. So that's the holistic view that we get through all these events of rebellion. Now he's establishing, listen, this is how no stranger comes near to the slaughter place. And nobody outside of Levi draws near to the slaughter place, because this is order. So there are roles. I spoke earlier about staying in one's lane, appointment, because it's clear then the body functions correctly and it retains Yahweh's presence. So there's a responsibility of Levi would bear the crookedness against the set-apart place and against the priesthood. And it was a very serious responsibility. So the role of maintaining Yahweh's presence was critical. They'd just seen what rebellion does and what uprising does. Now Yahweh makes it clear, listen, this is how you're going to go forward, because they've tasted a bit of Yahweh's wrath being poured out. So now this was a clear warning. Now you follow his authority, appointed order. And that's a lesson for us, And we are all a body of Messiah to be ministering as a light to the nations before his face consistently. And it's a wonderful thing to be having this gift and privilege to be a light to the nations. Caring for Yahweh's people is a huge part of that, And so those who spend their time in Yahweh's presence all on their own and willfully choose to ignore any kind of fellowship in the body or ignore the sins of those that they are responsible to encourage and teach. In other words, you get a lot of people that are always just on their own praying but not serving. They ultimately become of no value, because we are a body that's supposed to be working together. We are to serve one another, bear one another's burdens, assist one another as we encourage one another, speak to each other in psalms, songs, and spiritual or praise, you get exact wording there. If we don't walk in the authority that's been given to us by Yeshua Messiah, there's a danger of the body having fewer people in it. We have a role as a body of Messiah, and within that body of Messiah, we are a chosen people, a treasured possession, which we are, and within that, there's a priesthood within that royalty of Messiah that must equip the body so that the body remains dressed in righteousness, reflecting the true life of our high priest and king. We understand that we've all been given the charge to serve, and to serve correctly, we must guard the commands. If we guard his commands, we know that we know him. So when we say, that's not required, yes, that was for them, but it's not for us, we're at risk of a Qoraḥ rebellion. We're at risk of a Dathan Aviram uprising, And so we understand that Renewed Writings makes it clear, if we want to know that we know Yahweh, then It's by guarding his commands. And here within this chapter is an establishment of who draws near, and those that are caused to draw near on behalf of the entire nation, keeping the protection of Yahweh for an entire nation. The priesthood must not suffer harm. So this is a valuable lesson in the order of Melchizedek. The responsibility of everyone else, instead of being rebellious against appointed leadership, you're required to support that appointed leadership with the proceeds from which you get by working in the field. And this is what causes us to be joined to our master in perfect unity. And so the gift of service, we've all been given as a gift of life. But within that gift, now we have a responsibility to make sure that the body stays intact. And within the order of Melchizedek, we learn from these instructions that the Levites in Melchizedek, we all get when I say that, hopefully, must be correctly supplied so that service within the body is not neglected and duty in the body is not neglected. Now, I don't want to be sounding like this irritating record about tithes and offerings, but it's so important because when one isn't tithing and offering and contributing as the word teaches, then you are in rebellion and are at risk of being destroyed. You know, I think that we see right through the history of Israel going through and even going into captivity for rebelling. I mean, they went into captivity. Number one, the land didn't have rest for 70 years. They didn't have the Sabbath rests. And with not having the Sabbath rest, we know that they were defiling themselves, going up to the high places, doing what the nations were doing, defiling their worship, corrupting their worship, not following the Torah. So obviously the priesthood suffered. And the priesthood became corrupt because they rather met the needs of the peoples wanting to hear what they wanted to hear. Don't prophesy to us this, speak to us what we want to hear. And all these things that Yahweh rebuked both the corrupt leadership, the nation, and the priesthood that had defiled their service, send them into captivity. When they came back and were rebuilding the walls, that error happened again not long after the rebuilding, during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, where the Levites had to go back to the fields because the body wasn't providing for the Levites. And in the case of this, Tobiah and all his company moved into the dwelling place of Yahweh, taking residency where they should not be, causing a disruption in service. So therefore, Yahweh would not be in the midst of his people and the risk thereof. And Nehemiah, when he came back and saw this, he brought about reform and he rebuked the people because they were neglecting their duty to be putting Yahweh first. One of the lessons we learn in rebellion is make sure you're always putting Yahweh first. And where it comes down to, because it's a repetition right through Scripture, is it really comes down to in the work of your hands. Are you putting Yahweh first or not? You know, we realize that the offerings that are brought to Yahweh are critical for a life of a body of Messiah. And if one is not bringing their correct offerings and their gifts and their tithes and their contributions, the body suffers. And when the body suffers, it can't shine. And therefore, those who do not know the truth will not be able to see the truth, because how will anybody know if no one's speaking? So this is a collective functional thing that we learn from this Torah portion in the light of the Qoraḥ rebellion, that there are many within the body, as described in the book of Yehuda, that are like Qoraḥ and his company, that aren't obeying as they should, but they are partaking within the festivities of the body and are actually causing the body to suffer harm. So this is a clear warning for us as we go through these readings, a reminder to us, also an encouragement to guard and be awake, watchful people, not neglecting the duties that's required to making sure that the body functions as it should. Now, we see a powerful witness here of making sure that, you know, there's a lot of people today who struggle with their ability to give tithes. And what we've learned over and over in Scripture, tithes is not a negotiable thing, it's a command. We also learned that first fruits are a non-negotiable too. What was negotiable, actually? Well, what was negotiable, which is something that was done by choice, on how much or how little to give, was in terms of a thanksgiving offering. I mean, that goes beyond everything else that's prescribed. There are so many people today that are giving free will offerings before their tithes and their first fruits, and they assume that they've met the requirements of the Torah when they in fact have not, as a result of many chosen, appointed servants of Yahweh who should be supported through tithes and offerings are suffering because obedience in the body isn't happening. This is, as I said, you can go read about it in Nehemiah 13. And when Nehemiah came, and when you translate the Hebrew words, when he came, he saw a fiasco happening, because it was a huge fiasco. And a fiasco means a complete failure. So there was a complete failure in order. And what we must learn as we go through the Torah each week is to restore complete order. But most people, when they hear the commands and when we hear these things, as soon as you say tithes, it's almost like a fiasco wants to arise. Instead of us just saying, hey, let me get my life in order, because it will be better for me if I just get my life in order. Sometimes the priesthood in the Levitical order literally saw who was bringing what. And they could see what people were doing. And so while others might be able to put on a cloak before many, presenting to Yahweh is clearly seen by Yahweh. And in the body today, it's obvious whether people are tithing or not. And sometimes I think, people, should be, when some people are bringing their offerings, you kind of feel like saying, I really pray Yahweh can help you get out of your financial fiasco, because, and they'll go, what fiasco? I'm doing well. Oh. And I'm not saying to be ugly or anything else. I'm just saying when we look at rebellion, it's part of the rebellion that's actually happening in a body where people are assuming I don't need to submit, I don't need to do here, so I'll grab from whatever and I'll decide. Go to where Yahweh's chosen. And where Yahweh chooses, that's where you submit, that's where you contribute, that's where you do everything. And that's where you participate, engage, build together. You can't be spread all over and go wherever you want to go, where the wind drives you, and think that I'm being obedient, because that's rebellion. And so the appeal that we make in the body is to have order restored, because we don't want fiasco. We don't want a complete failure. We don't want chaos. We don't want boldness. We want boldness. Boldness or boldness? B-A-L-D or B-O-L-D? We want the O in the LD, So this is what it is coming down to, because, when Nehemiah came and got pretty angry with what was going on and what was already set up, Nehemiah didn't call for a financial strategy meeting. He rebuked the officials and said, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? He didn't come and say, okay, guys, let's get together and find out why aren't you obeying? That was what he was saying. And so everyone who was supposed to be in service was brought back and said, now you guys better start, because, it's all about, do you want to retain Yahweh's presence in our lives? And it comes down to just being obedient and functioning the way our master has prescribed. A lot of times people set aside their priorities when it comes to obeying Yahweh. And in order to justify their setting aside their priorities, which they don't outwardly say, I'm setting this aside because I want this. It's seen in the fruit of their lives. But in order to justify that, they'll get others that will kind of say, yes, you need to do this first, you need to do that first. And I just want to bring back a clear reality in the light of the rebellion that we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks, and more specifically today, Qoraḥ's rebellion against authority and leadership, is the appeal for a body to start functioning simply as the word commands, and get back to the basic obedience so the order is restored. Because when that is established, more actually can be done. And when we see the ancient people of Israel scattered their tithes instead of giving it to the priesthood. And when I say scattered their tithes, because it's like you give it for other stuff that's like, what is it bringing back? So you take what Yahweh's given you, because it's a gift of service, what he makes your hands do, and you scatter it for other things rather than bringing it to what's required. you become a scattered people. Actually, that's what happened to them, you know? And so it's a serious thing that we as Israel today must learn. Don't scatter your tithes and offerings. Bring them to Yahweh. There's a difference. Because people will scatter it over their fleshly needs. I talk about scattering. It's like you're giving it to things that actually are of no value, or you think, if I don't have that. I said to a guy at the gym the other day, I do have my little chats at the gym with some of the guys in between sets, you know, and I said, we were just talking generally, and I said, you know, we often say to people, now for those in South Africa, it will make sense, you know, SARS doesn't come first. Or IRS doesn't come first. Your bond or your, mortgage doesn't come first. Your car payment or your cell phone or your groceries don't come first. Yahweh comes first. Because when all those things come first, you're scattering your tithes. And when you look back and you go, oh, what can I give? So you might feel guilty, then you tip Yahweh. Dangerous place to be. You're robbing Yahweh. You're robbing Elohim. And this is why I'm highlighting this, because in the light of what's being instructed here as an established order is in the face of the rebellion against authority that was just seen within a nation and the chaos that it caused. So we see then in verse 19 when he goes on and he talks about a covenant of salt, when it says here, all the contributions of the set-apart gifts which the children of Israel present to you, I've given to you and your sons and daughters with your law forever. It is a covenant of salt forever. We see again this idea of salt in Scripture. We are told in Vayikra, with all your offerings you bring salt. Salt is a very important element that we see in Scripture teaching us valuable lessons. In Romans 12 verse 1, we are told to offer our bodies as a living offering, set apart, well-pleasing to Elohim. This is our reasonable worship. Having said that, we are to bear in mind that if we are to be an offering, that is a living offering unto Yahweh, then we are to be salted, because here we see as understanding with all your offerings you bring salt. Our master said in Matityahu 5 verse 10 to 13, blessed are those persecuted for righteousness' sake, because theirs is the reign of the heavens. Blessed are you when they persecute you, when they reproach you, and falsely say every wicked word against you for my sake. Rejoice and be glad, because your reward in the heavens is great. For in this way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt becomes tasteless, how shall it be seasoned? For it is no longer of any use but to be thrown out and be trodden down by men. In Marcos 9 verse 49 to 50, he says, everyone shall be seasoned with fire, and every offering shall be seasoned with salt. Salt is good, but if the salt becomes tasteless, how shall you season it? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace among one another. Lucas 14 verse 34 to 35 says, the salt is good, but if it becomes tasteless, with what shall it be seasoned? If it is not fit for land nor for manure, they throw it out. He who has ears, let him hear. Now, all of these passages that I've just read in terms of our master's words speaking about salt, in Matityahu, this was at the beginning of what is known as the Sermon on the Mount, over 3 chapters that we see in Matityahu 5 through 7. And it's connected with what's understood as the Beatitudes, you know, blessed are those, etc. And Marcos, we see the highlight in that passage is joined immediately to not causing offense or causing others to sin. And in Lucas, it's supplemented to a series of sayings regarding the conditions for discipleship or walking in obedient service to the master. In other words, salt carries a very significant meaning for us in Scripture, in our lives being offered up as a daily living offering. But why salt? What is it about salt that makes offerings acceptable and carrying such depth of meaning? Salt, or otherwise known as sodium chloride, NaCl, I wasn't very good at science at school, but I learned this in the Torah, is a substance that became a symbol of fidelity, which is a quality or state of being trustworthy and faithful, and also a state of constancy and consistency. In other words, remaining true. In Leviticus or Vayikra, offerings of salt was used as a preservative. And it would typify the eternal nature of this covenant of salt that exists between Yahweh and his chosen bride, Israel. The term covenant of salt refers to an everlasting ordinance, and it's a figurative form of expression that's actually founded upon the conservative property of salt, which actually means to be free from corruption. Now, salt or salting something is used over 35 times in Scripture. In the book of Iyov, we are seeing that it's described to season food, which we all know. I mean, food that's tasteless isn't nice to eat. It says in Iyov 6, verse 6, is tasteless food eaten without salt? Is there any flavor in the juice of mallows? The obvious is tasteless food isn't really nicely eaten. So you got to put a bit of salt, you know. It's in offerings, as I described in Vayikra, with all your offerings, you bring salt. Yechezkiel, in chapter 43, verse 24, it says, you shall bring them before Yahweh, and the priests shall throw salt on them and offer them up as a burnt offering to Yahweh, because with all your offerings you bring salt. It's also used in 2 Kings where waters were purified. We also see where a site of a devoted city was scattered with salt in the book of Judges when Abimelech fought against the city. And we see a powerful picture of salt using the idea to preserve or to destroy. And the Hebrew word for salt, melach, actually comes from a root word which means to pulverize or to rub together. So when our master gives this instruction as a parable witness before the crowds in Matityahu 5, that you are the salt of the earth, it's in context of persecution. So when we are being grinded and rubbed and pulverized by the pressures of this world for righteousness' sake, that's when we are able to bring forth a taste of the eternal covenant in the Master as salty believers. But if we neglect our duty of set apartness, we become tasteless, worthless, of no use, but to be thrown out and trampled upon. Now, the only way salt becomes saltless is by adding a foreign substance to it. And so we see the idea here because, look, if you take salt and you put it in water, the water's salty. Okay, so salt doesn't become saltless by being used in offerings or put in water or put on food, and actually enhances it. But the way you destroy salt from becoming saltless, okay, is by adding a foreign substance to it. That's what our master is warning us against. Because then he says when it becomes tasteless, it's because you've added something else to remove the substance of the power of that salt. Now, some might be more clued up in science than I and say you can't make salt tasteless, etc. But the parable our master uses is that salt can become tasteless. So debate that with our master one day, you know. So while you might try and say from a scientific level, he's speaking a parable here where you can lose your flavor if you bring in foreign substances that should not be brought in. You know, for instance, no leaven was to be put on the slaughter place. So with all your offerings, you would not put leaven on the slaughter place. So therefore, we can't bring in compromise and sin into our lives and try and have the ability to witness of a covenant life of being a daily living offering when sin and compromise is being mixed in with that presentation of one's life as an offering. In the context of being called salt of the earth, as I said, it's about persecution for righteousness' sake. And therefore, straight after telling us that we are salt of the earth, he tells us that we are blessed for when we are persecuted for righteousness' sake, you know. And as we go under these trials and as we are crushed, Shaul reminds us we are crushed, but we're not destroyed. Tasteless in the Greek is the word morain, which means to lose its flavor, become neutralized or become foolish. And it also means that which is without knowledge. So how are we neutralized? You know, sound like one of these spy movies or space movies, neutralized. You know, but we do get neutralized. How? Well, we shouldn't, but how do people get neutralized? Being neutralized or becoming of no effect is when you mix what shouldn't be in the mix, in it. So one thing that we also have to understand is that salt itself is a miracle. Sodium and chloride on their own are quite dangerous substances. But in the wisdom of Yahweh's creation, bringing those two together brings about a miracle. And this is the joy of what our Master has brought to us who were once without him. And by his blood brings us into a covenant which we had never had access to by his blood. And we bring about, what's brought about in our lives is the ability to actually have this miracle witness of the flavor, substance, and fragrance of Messiah being witnessed in our lives through complete obedience. And any excuse to obedience is a sure sign that the salt in you has become tasteless, or that there is no salt in you. In ancient times, salt was a very highly prized commodity. It was used to pay wages to Roman soldiers. Salty believers are not afraid to live set-apart lives in a corrupt and lawless world. Salty believers are of great value. Salty believers, as I said, represent a miracle. Because what you are in Messiah, you could not do yourself. But what he's done in you, you now have the gift and privilege to work out with fear and trembling as you remain salty and don't lose the flavor of Messiah in you. We see a wonderful witness here, and again, in the context of the covenant of salt, in the context of establishing the order of Levi, in the context of the rebellion that's just been had in the nation of Israel, we understand a very clear lesson coming back again. If you disobey, or if you are disobedient and rebellious in any way, you become tasteless salt to be thrown out. So we want to remain salty. Colossians 4 verse 6 says, let your words always be with favor, seasoned with salt, so that you know how you ought to answer each one. In other words, when we got to give a witness of Messiah, it must be with the flavor of covenant. So therefore, we will not speak against the Torah. We will speak what the Torah teaches us, how we live lives, because that's how a daily living offering, when Yaakov says, I'll show you what I believe by what I do, he also is highlighting here that I'll show you I'm seasoned with salt because I'm obeying the covenant. Our conversations must be seasoned, which carries the meaning of being prepared, always prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have, the reason we have this hope. And if someone asks us why we do something that's in accordance to the Torah, we are to be able to answer them. We are to be able to show them. Now, I know for brand new believers that are on the milk of the word, might not quite know when somebody says, why are you doing that? Say, I don't know. Well, the best answer is because the word says so. Don't have to engage in debates over the matter of the Torah. They're fruitless. But when you are able to engage in a discussion and try to win somebody over, as Shaul says, yes, I want to persuade you with the good news, then be ready. And you can only be ready when you've exercised obedience to understand what it's about. For example, why do we wear tzitzit? We looked at it last week. So we're reminded not to rebel. If you go and you say, well, I'm not sure, let me come back and tell you, then you haven't prepared yourself. We understand our speech seasoned with salt with the Torah of Yahweh will preserve us in this age. How will your speech be seasoned with salt or be seasoned with the word if you're not meditating on the word day and night? The principle here is that we have got to be salty believers. That's the bottom line. Covenant believers. How do we have salt in our lives? By being immersed in the word. And when I say immersed in the word, it's almost like a picture. I have a little bit experience in the culinary world. I was in the hospitality industry before we went full-time into ministry. And, for a while I was doing some chef bits and then I was in management. But there's principles that I've learned in terms of cooking practices. Some I've discarded because it was clearly not clean, okay, and learned the error of my ways in that. But there are principles that are very clear. And one of them, in order to bring about good tenderization and flavor into meat, is a process called brining, where you submerge your meat into a salt solution. And that salt solution, give you a nice tip, you boil up some nice rock salt, you put in some garlic and honey and herbs and whatever flavors you want. Let it cool down. Don't stick the meat into the hot water. You obviously make a concentrated solution, add more water to it, put your meat in it, however size it is. It can go from a couple of hours if it's a few lamb chops or chicken breasts, or to a day if it's a nice leg of lamb, or a couple of days if it's a hip of beef, And the longer that meat stays, when we did lamb on the spit for one Pesach, I had the lamb in a brine bath for 2 days. And what it does is it brings all those flavors and it permeates. Now I'm giving this here because we're getting to lunchtime, so none of us are going to have lamb on the spit for lunch, but just be thankful to Yahweh what we get when we eat lunch together. But I'm making your taste buds tingle with salty issues, And this process is a better way than what's typically understood as marinating, where typically people would take an oil-based substance and coat their meat with that. What the oil does, it seals the meat, so no penetration into the cells of the meat can happen. But what brining does, it goes through the meat and it expands the cells of the meat, and it brings through the water brining process all the flavors that are with it into the meat, softening the meat, opening up the cells of the meat so it's not tense and restricted. So when you cook it, you get the tenderness and you get the flavor. So I've given you a bit of cooking lessons. If you want to know a bit more on the recipes, you can contact me. But okay, now I've mentioned that to highlight again how we are to be immersed in the word, because the longer we spend in the word, the more salty we will taste to others, because then they will taste and see how good Yahweh is. But if you are just coating yourself with a bit of oil outside, with a bit of barbecue sauce and whatever, one little lick and you'll be, oh, that's fine. But then there's nothing, no substance inside. And it's all tight and restricted and hard to swallow. I'm using this imagery in parable lessons to teach us, again, how we are to be immersed in the Master's word, so that we spend time seeing the goodness therein. No foreign substances in the mix. So that when we are able to present our lives as a living offering, it's done with salt, and the flavor, favor, and substance and fragrance of our Master is readily available to all who ask. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're getting closer to lunch now, and I've made you nice and hungry. But I just want to highlight this Torah portion teaches us a valuable lesson. The time for grumbling is over. It's time to walk in the righteous right rulings of our Master. And we be true worshippers who are worshiping the Father in spirit and in truth, not allowing any circumstances to cause compromise in our lives in any way. Guarding ourselves from becoming bald so that we can stand firm in the Master and be bold, and that we can proclaim the praises of him who's called us out of the darkness that we were once in, and the light that we now are in, as true salty believers that are walking in a covenant to his praise and esteem, recognizing that we submit to his authority, not our own, and we acknowledge that authority, and not only acknowledge and submit, but it comes with a participation to engage. Because when you engage in, as we read a couple of weeks ago with Merari and learnt some lessons, when you've got no time to be sitting around, when you're sitting around doing nothing, that's when the grumbling starts brewing. But when you're engaging, when you are getting involved, encouraging one another, building one another, helping one another, that's when you actually become a body that resonates, a salt that hasn't lost its taste or its flavor. And we become people that are able to guard ourselves against corruption, against the falsehood. We can differentiate between the clean and the unclean, the set apart and the profane, and make sure that we're not touching that which we should not, lest we render ourselves as rebels before the Master, whose destruction will be evident when his fire comes. So let's be people that can give our best unto him, that we are bearing fruit of righteousness, that we are being awake and watchful, submersed in the word, or is that right? Immersed in the word, submerged in the word. There we go. And just proclaiming the truth in everything we say and do, as our speech and our walk is seasoned with salt. Amen. Okay, on that note, let's pray and enjoy lunch. Master Yahweh, we thank you that we can sit once again at your feet, delight ourselves in your truth that sets us free. And over these last couple of weeks, there are very valuable lessons that we're learning against the dangers of rebellion that can so easily creep in. And in a day and age where the love of many is growing cold, these are words that need to be urgently proclaimed. This is the season for proclaiming these words, so that we are snatching many from the fire of destruction and guarding our lives so that we can retain a covenant witness within us and present ourselves as living offerings with the salt of your covenant as a perpetual sign of our love that we have for you because you first loved us. We love you and we bless you, and I thank you, Master Yahweh, that you continue to instruct us what it means to be guarding righteousness, to be guarding set apartness. And I pray that you continue to strengthen us in the truth of your word so that we can be the salt of the earth, the light of the earth, no matter what we face, rejoicing in you at all times. We thank you that we can share this meal together. You're our provider, you're our sustainer, you're our strength and our stronghold. And we bless you and praise you and pray your wondrous blessing over every table that is now feasting in your presence. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah, amen and amen.